March 15th, 2019. A decorated war veteran was handcuffed and dragged from a small-town diner in front of dozens of shocked customers, accused of disturbing the peace over what seemed like a simple misunderstanding. But when the police chief reached for the man's wallet to process him at the station, he found something that would make his blood run cold and change everything he thought he knew about the arrest. What could possibly turn a routine, disturbing the peace charge into a career-defining moment that would haunt this police chief forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of March 15th, 2019, started like any other Friday in Millbrook, a quiet town of barely 8,000 people nestled in the farmlands of rural Kansas. Chief Robert Dalton had been running the Millbrook Police Department for 12 years, and in that time he'd built a reputation as a no-nonsense lawman who ran a tight ship. At 53 years old, with steel-gray hair cropped military short and a permanently furrowed brow, Dalton prided himself on maintaining order in his town. That morning, he was sitting in his office, reviewing incident reports, when Officer Jenny Cromwell burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. "Chief, we've got a situation at Rosie's Diner. Multiple calls coming in about a disturbance." Dalton grabbed his jacket without hesitation. Rosie's Diner was Millbrook's social hub, a beloved institution on Main Street where everyone from farmers to businessmen gathered for breakfast. Any trouble there meant trouble for the whole town. "What kind of disturbance?" he asked as they headed to the patrol car. "Caller said there's a man making a scene, shouting at customers, refusing to leave. Sounds agitated, possibly unstable." The drive took less than 3 minutes. When they arrived, Dalton could see concerned faces pressed against the diner's large windows. He'd handled hundreds of disturbances in his career, drunks, disputes, the occasional mental health crisis. This would be no different. Inside, the diner had gone eerily quiet. About 30 customers sat frozen in their booths, eyes fixed on a man standing near the back corner. He appeared to be in his early 70s, wearing a faded green jacket that had seen better days, jeans worn thin at the knees, and scuffed work boots. His weathered face was contorted with emotion, and his hands trembled as he gestured emphatically. Rosie Martinez, the diner's owner for the past 25 years, stood behind the counter with her phone still in hand. She caught Dalton's eye and mouthed, "Thank God you're here." The man's voice cracked as he spoke. "You don't understand. I need to find him. Someone here has to know something." Dalton approached with his palms raised in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Sir, I'm Chief Dalton. I need you to take a breath and calm down." The elderly man's eyes darted toward him, wild with desperation. "I can't calm down. My brother, he was supposed to meet me here 3 days ago. Nobody's seen him. Nobody knows anything. Sir, we can help you, but first you need to settle down. You're frightening these people. I don't care about frightening anyone." The man shouted, his voice breaking. "My brother is missing." Officer Cromwell had positioned herself near the door, hand resting on her radio. Several customers were already gathering their belongings, clearly wanting to leave, but afraid to move. Dalton's jaw tightened. He'd given the man a chance to cooperate. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to calm down and come outside with me so we can talk about this properly. I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me where Thomas is." That was enough. Dalton had a responsibility to the other people in that diner. "Sir, you're under arrest for disturbing the peace. Put your hands behind your back." "What? No. You don't understand. Hands behind your back. Now." The man's face crumpled, and for a moment Dalton thought he might cry. Instead, something hardened in his expression, a look Dalton couldn't quite place. Resignation, perhaps, or disappointment. "This is wrong," the man said quietly, but he turned around and placed his hands behind his back. Dalton secured the handcuffs, feeling the man's wrists, thin, bony, trembling. Up close, he could see the deep lines etched in the man's face, the grey stubble on his chin, the yellowing of his flannel shirt collar. This wasn't some vagrant troublemaker. This was someone's grandfather, someone who'd clearly fallen on hard times. For a brief moment, Dalton felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. The law was the law, and his job was to maintain order. "What's your name?" Dalton asked, as he guided the man toward the door. James Thornton." "Well, Mr. Thornton, you'll have a chance to explain everything down at the station. But you can't go around shouting and disturbing businesses." As they walked through the diner, the silence was oppressive. 30 pairs of eyes watched them pass. Dalton noticed old Mrs. Henderson, with her hand over her mouth, genuine distress in her eyes. Marcus Webb, who owned the hardware store, shook his head slowly. Even Rosie looked troubled rather than relieved. The whispers started before they even reached the door. "That's not right. Poor old fellow. He just seemed scared." Dalton ignored them all. He'd made the right call. He was sure of it. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the scene that had just unfolded. Dalton opened the back door of his patrol car and placed his hand on Thornton's head, guiding him into the seat with practiced efficiency. James Thornton stared straight ahead, his jaw set, his eyes distant. He didn't say another word. During the short drive to the station, Dalton glanced in the rearview mirror several times. Thornton sat perfectly still, his handcuffed hands resting in his lap, his expression unreadable. There was something about the man's bearing now, a dignity perhaps, or a quiet strength that seemed at odds with the desperate figure who'd been shouting in the diner moments earlier. "Mr. Thornton," Dalton said, his tone slightly softer, "when we get to the station, you'll need to empty your pockets. Do you have any weapons on you? Anything sharp?" "No." "Any ID? Wallet?" A long pause. "Yes." "Good. We'll get you processed, and then you can make a phone call if you need to." Thornton's reflection in the mirror showed no reaction. He simply continued staring forward, as if looking at something far beyond the windshield. Beyond Millbrook, beyond this moment entirely. Back at the station, Officer Cromwell helped Dalton escort Thornton to the processing area. The Millbrook Police Department wasn't large, just 8 officers total, covering the town and surrounding county. The booking area consisted of a single desk, a camera for mugshots, and a holding cell that rarely saw use beyond the occasional drunk needing to sleep it off. "Stand here," Dalton directed. Positioning Thornton in front of the camera, he removed the handcuffs. "Look straight ahead." The flash went off, capturing James Thornton's lined face, his weary eyes, his resigned expression. "Now I need you to empty your pockets." "Everything on the desk." Thornton reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills, maybe $20 total. From his jeans pocket came a set of keys, a small pocket knife, and some loose change. "Wallet?" Dalton prompted. Thornton hesitated, his hand hovering over his back pocket. For just a second, something flashed across his face. Fear. Reluctance? Then he slowly withdrew a worn leather wallet, its edges frayed, the leather darkened with age and use. He placed it on the desk. Dalton picked it up, preparing to inventory its contents for the report. Standard procedure. He'd done this 1,000 times. He opened the wallet, and everything changed. The first thing Chief Dalton saw was the driver's license, standard Kansas ID showing James Edward Thornton, age 71, with an address in Wichita. Nothing remarkable there. He set it aside and continued his inventory. Behind the license slot was a faded photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. It showed 2 young men in military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincibility of youth. One of them was clearly a much younger James Thornton. The other bore a striking resemblance. The brother he'd been asking about, Dalton assumed. He set the photo down and reached into the billfold section. His fingers touched something metallic, something heavy. Not a credit card, not currency. Dalton pulled it out and felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a Congressional Medal of Honor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The distinctive light blue ribbon, the 13 white stars on the pad. The eagle with spread wings. the word valor engraved in the center. Dalton had only seen one of these once before, in a museum in Washington, D.C., during a law enforcement conference. They didn't give these out for showing up. They didn't give these out for being brave. They gave these to the rarest kind of hero. The room suddenly felt smaller. Officer Cromwell had been filing paperwork at the adjacent desk, but she'd gone quiet. Dalton looked up to find her staring at the medal in his hands, her eyes wide. "Chief," she whispered. "Is that—" "Yeah." His voice came out rougher than intended. James Thornton stood perfectly still, watching Dalton's reaction with those same distant eyes. No pride, no expectation of special treatment, just waiting. Dalton's mind raced. Congressional Medals of Honor weren't just handed out. Recipients had to perform an act of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of their own life, above and beyond the call of duty. There were fewer than 70 living recipients in the entire country, and he'd just arrested one for disturbing the peace. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the medal over. Engraved on the back was a name, CPL James E. Thornton, along with a date, November 12, 1969, Vietnam. Dalton felt a wave of nausea roll through his stomach. His own father had served in Vietnam, had come home with scars both visible and invisible, had spent Dalton's childhood battling nightmares and survivor's guilt. His father had been one of the lucky ones. He'd made it home. He'd built a life, but he'd never been the same. And this man, this hero who'd earned the nation's highest military honor, had been shouting desperately in a diner about a missing brother. And Dalton had slapped handcuffs on him like a common criminal. "Mr. Thornton," Dalton said slowly, carefully placing the medal back on the desk. I didn't know. You didn't ask." There was no accusation in Thornton's voice, just a simple statement of fact. Dalton's throat felt tight. "Sir, please, sit down. Let me get you some water." For the first time since the arrest, Thornton's expression shifted. A flicker of surprise quickly masked. "I don't need water. I need to find my brother." Officer Cromwell was already pulling out a chair. "Please, Mr. Thornton, let's start over." Thornton looked between them, then slowly lowered himself into the chair. Up close, Dalton could see the old scars on the man's hands. The way his left ear had a chunk missing from the upper cartilage. The slight hitch in his breathing that suggested old injuries that had never quite healed right. Dalton pulled up a chair across from him, the medal still sitting on the desk between them like an indictment. "Tell me about your brother, everything, from the beginning." Thornton's jaw worked for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust them. Finally he spoke. "His name is Thomas Thornton. He's my younger brother, 68 years old. 3 days ago, we were supposed to meet at Rosie's Diner at 9 in the morning. He never showed up. Why were you meeting here? You're from Wichita, according to your license. Thomas lives here, in Millbrook, has for the past 15 years, ever since his wife passed. He bought a small house on Maple Street, kept to himself mostly. We talk every Sunday on the phone, regular as clockwork. But this week, nothing." Dalton exchanged a glance with Cromwell. "Have you tried going to his house?" "Of course I tried." The desperation crept back into Thornton's voice. "I went there first thing when he didn't show up at the diner. The place was locked up tight. His truck was in the driveway, but nobody answered. I looked through the windows. Everything looked normal, but Thomas wasn't there. And you didn't call the police?" Cromwell asked gently. Thornton's laugh was bitter. "I did. I called Thursday morning. Young officer came out, took a report. Said Thomas was probably just out of town. Told me to wait 72 hours before filing a missing person report. Said adults have a right to go where they please without checking in." Dalton winced. That would have been Officer Patterson, fresh out of the academy, still learning that protocol sometimes mattered less than instinct. "What did you do then?" "I waited. Checked his house again Thursday night, Friday morning. Still nothing. His mail was piling up. His cat, Thomas, has this orange tabby he spoils rotten. I could hear it crying inside the house like it hadn't been fed. That's when I knew something was really wrong. Thomas would never leave that cat alone." Thornton's hands clenched into fists on the table. "So this morning I went back to the diner. Thought maybe someone who knew him might have seen something, might know where he'd gone. But everyone just stared at me like I was crazy. They said Thomas kept to himself, didn't socialize much. Nobody had seen him in days, but nobody seemed concerned about it either. And that's when you started raising your voice. Dalton said quietly. That's when I realized nobody in this whole damn town cared that a man had disappeared. Thornton's eyes blazed with renewed anger, but also with pain. My brother fought for this country. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home with shrapnel still lodged in his spine that doctors couldn't remove. He lost his wife to cancer, buried her alone because we were estranged at the time. And now he's missing, and nobody gives a damn. The weight of guilt settled heavier on Dalton's shoulders. You said you were estranged. Thornton's expression softened, grief replacing anger. For 30 years we didn't speak. A stupid argument about things that don't matter now. Our father's will, if you can believe that. We let pride keep us apart for 3 decades. His voice cracked. 5 years ago, Thomas called me out of the blue. Said life was too short for old grudges. We've been making up for lost time ever since. Every Sunday, 9 o'clock, we talk on the phone. And now, Cromwell pulled a notepad from her desk drawer. Mr. Thornton, we're going to find your brother. I need you to give me every detail you can remember. When did you last speak with him? Sunday, March 10th, 6 days ago. He sounded fine, normal. We talked about meeting up this Friday today for breakfast. He wanted to show me something, said it was important. Did he say what? No, just that it was something he'd been working on, something that mattered to him. Dalton stood abruptly. Cromwell, get Patterson in here. I want Thomas Thornton's house checked immediately. Get a key from the landlord if you have to, but I want eyes inside that house within the hour. Yes, sir. Dalton turned back to James Thornton. Sir, I owe you an apology. I should have listened before I acted. That's on me. Thornton met his gaze steadily. Just find my brother, Chief. That's all that matters now. Dalton picked up the Medal of Honor from the desk and held it out. This belongs with you. As Thornton took the medal, his fingers brushed against Dalton's hand. The chief felt calluses, old scars, the physical evidence of a life lived in service and hardship. November 1969, Dalton said. What happened? Thornton's eyes grew distant, looking at something Dalton couldn't see. A lifetime ago. Different war. Different world. Will you tell me? A long silence stretched between them. Then Thornton carefully returned the medal to his wallet, his movements reverent despite the worn leather. Let's find Thomas first. The rest is just old ghosts that don't matter much anymore. But Dalton could see in the man's eyes that the ghosts mattered very much indeed. 20 minutes later, Chief Dalton stood on the front porch of 247 Maple Street with James Thornton beside him. The house was a modest, single-story ranch, its white paint peeling in places, the small yard meticulously maintained despite the neglect of the past several days. A blue pickup truck from the early 2000s sat in the gravel driveway, covered in a light layer of dust. Officer Patterson, a lanky 24-year-old with nervous energy, had already secured permission from the property management company. He held up a key ring. Got it from the landlord's office, Chief. He said Thomas has been a model tenant, always pays rent early. From inside the house they could hear a cat yowling pitifully. That's Winston, James said quietly. Thomas named him after Churchill. Said the cat had the same stubborn streak. Dalton took the keys from Patterson. Mr. Thornton, I need you to wait here while we clear the house. Standard procedure. James nodded, though his body was rigid with tension. His eyes never left the front door. Dalton unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open. The smell hit him immediately. Not decomposition, thank God, but the acrid odor of a litter box, long overdue for cleaning. An orange tabby appeared instantly, weaving between Dalton's legs and crying frantically. Kitchen, food and water, Dalton said to Patterson. Take care of the cat first. The interior was neat despite the desperate animal. A small living room with worn furniture, walls decorated with framed photographs of landscapes and what appeared To be Thomas's late wife, a gentle-looking woman with kind eyes. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on history, gardening, and military memoirs. Dalton moved through the house methodically. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and put away. The refrigerator held normal staples, nothing spoiled. A calendar on the wall showed various appointments. Doctor's visit on March 8th, circled. Gym breakfast written on March 15th, today, with 2 exclamation points. The bedroom was where things got interesting. The bed was made with military precision, but Thomas's reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to an open book. Reading glasses that someone would typically grab before leaving the house. Dalton checked the closet, shirts organized by color, shoes lined up neatly. Nothing appeared missing or disturbed, but on the small desk in the corner, Dalton found something that made his pulse quicken. Papers, lots of them. Printed articles about local land development, county zoning meetings, environmental reports, all of them highlighted and annotated in careful handwriting. At the center of the desk sat a spiral notebook, open to a page dated March 9th, 2 days before Thomas disappeared. The entry read, "Met with Henderson again. He's worried about the same things I am. The creek runs right through those properties. If they dig where they're planning, contamination is guaranteed. Need to present findings at county meeting next Thursday. Jim will back me up, he always does." Dalton photographed the page with his phone, then carefully flipped through the previous entries. For the past 3 months, Thomas had been documenting concerns about a development project, something called Millbrook Meadows, a planned housing subdivision on the north end of town. "Chief," Patterson called from the bathroom, "got something." Dalton found the young officer standing near the sink, pointing at the medicine cabinet. It was open, revealing prescription bottles neatly arranged. Patterson indicated one in particular. "Blood pressure medication, prescription filled March 7th, 30-day supply. Only 2 pills are missing." "Meaning he wouldn't have gone anywhere without taking this bottle with him," Dalton said. "Not voluntarily, no, sir." The implication hung heavy in the air. Dalton returned to the living room where James waited just inside the doorway, the orange cat now purring in his arms. "Mr. Thornton, did your brother ever mention being involved in any local issues? Environmental concerns, development projects?" James's brow furrowed. "He mentioned something a few weeks back. Said there was a big construction project planned for some land near his property. He was upset about it, said they were cutting corners on environmental studies." "Why?" Dalton showed him the photograph of the notebook entry. "Did he say anything about presenting findings at a county meeting?" "He said he was planning to speak up about it. Thomas was like that. Couldn't stand seeing something wrong without trying to fix it. He spent weeks researching, talking to neighbors, checking public records." James's voice grew urgent. "You think this has something to do with him disappearing?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Dalton pulled out his phone and dialed Officer Cromwell. "I need you to pull all permits and documentation for a development project called Millbrook Meadows. Also, find out who owns the property and who's financing the construction." He hung up and turned to Patterson. "I want you to canvass this street, every house within 3 blocks. Find out if anyone saw Thomas leave, saw any unusual vehicles, heard anything out of the ordinary. And find this Henderson person Thomas mentioned meeting with." Patterson nodded and hurried out. Dalton looked at James, still cradling the cat. "Your brother was a fighter, wasn't he?" "Always has been. Even as kids, he was the one who stood up to bullies who couldn't walk past someone who needed help." James's voice caught. "After Vietnam, I thought he'd lost that part of himself, the war. It changed him, made him quieter, more withdrawn. But when Linda, his wife, got sick, I saw that fighter come back. He researched every treatment, questioned. Every doctor, never gave up, even when the odds were hopeless. You mentioned you were estranged for 30 years. What brought you back together?" James set the cat down gently. Winston immediately began figure-8ing around his ankles. My daughter. My granddaughter, actually. She was doing a family tree project for school, asked questions about her uncle that I couldn't answer. Realized I'd let pride cost me half a lifetime with my only brother. He paused, his eyes glistening. Called him that night. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting all those years for me to come to my senses. We talked for 4 hours. Cried like children. Made a promise we'd never let anything come between us again. The emotion in the room was thick enough to cut. Dalton thought about his own siblings, the petty arguments they'd had over the years that suddenly seemed incredibly small. "We're going to find him, Mr. Thornton. I give you my word. Can I stay here, take care of Winston until Thomas comes home?" Dalton hesitated. The house might be a crime scene, but looking at the elderly veteran holding his brother's cat, the hope and fear warring in his eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "You can stay, but don't touch anything in the bedroom or office, and if you find anything at all, you call me immediately." James nodded gratefully. Back at his patrol car, Dalton sat in silence for a moment, processing what he'd learned. A missing veteran who'd been investigating a controversial development project. Medication left behind, no signs of packed bags or planned travel. The pieces weren't adding up to anything good. His phone buzzed with a text from Cromwell. "Found info on Millbrook Meadows. You need to see this now." Dalton started the engine, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. Something told him this missing person case was about to become much more complicated. As he drove away from Maple Street, he glanced in his rearview mirror. James Thornton stood in the doorway of his brother's house, a solitary figure backlit by the afternoon sun, waiting for answers that Dalton wasn't sure he wanted to find. Whatever Thomas Thornton had stumbled onto, whatever he'd been planning to expose at that county meeting, someone hadn't wanted him to make it there. The question was, who stood to lose if the truth came out? And more importantly, was Thomas still alive to tell it? Officer Cromwell had spread documents across the conference table like a battlefield map. When Dalton entered the station, she looked up with an expression he'd rarely seen on her face, genuine concern mixed with barely contained anger. "Chief, Millbrook Meadows isn't just some small housing development. We're talking about a 140-acre parcel on the north side, right along Blackwater Creek. The developer is proposing 250 homes, commercial space, the whole works." Dalton picked up one of the documents, a glossy architectural rendering showing a pristine suburban paradise with manicured lawns and happy families. "Who's behind it?" "Summit Ridge Development Corporation. The CEO is a man named Victor Ashford." The name hit Dalton like a physical blow. Victor Ashford, he should have known. Cromwell caught his reaction. "You know him?" "Yeah, I know him." Dalton's voice was tight. "He grew up here in Millbrook, 3 years behind me in school. Left for Kansas City after college. Made a fortune in real estate development. Came back about 5 years ago, bought up half the commercial properties on Main Street. Let me guess, not well loved. Depends who you ask. The business owners whose buildings he renovated think he's a savior. The families who got displaced by rising rents have a different opinion." Dalton flipped through more papers. "What's the timeline on this project?" "That's where it gets interesting. The County Planning Commission approved the initial permits 6 months ago, but there's been pushback from environmental groups. Blackwater Creek feeds into the municipal water supply for 3 towns, including us. If construction contaminates it..." She trailed off, the implications clear. Thomas Thornton was one of the people raising concerns. Not just raising them, he had evidence. "Look at this." Cromwell pulled up a document on her laptop. "This is the environmental impact study submitted by Summit Ridge. It says groundwater contamination risk is minimal, but Thomas requested the raw data through a Freedom of Information Act request. According to his notes, the numbers don't match." Dalton leaned over her shoulder, scanning the screen. The study was falsified, or heavily manipulated. Thomas compiled his own analysis, using county geological surveys from the 1980s. That whole area sits on limestone bedrock with underground channels. One crack during excavation, and you're looking at direct contamination of the aquifer. How much money are we talking about here? Cromwell pulled up another file. The project is valued at $47 million. Summit Ridge has already secured financing, hired contractors, purchased equipment. Breaking ground is scheduled for April 1st, 16 days from now. Dalton let out a low whistle. $47 million. That was motive enough to silence someone asking uncomfortable questions. I need to talk to Ashford. Set up a meeting. Already done. He's expecting you at his office in 30 minutes. I may have implied it was about a routine permit question. Dalton allowed himself a thin smile. Good work, Cromwell. While I'm there, I want you tracking down this Henderson person Thomas mentioned. And pull phone records for Thomas's landline and cell. See who he was talking to in the days before he disappeared. Chief, we don't have a warrant for phone records yet. We'd need to show probable cause, then show it. A man with a medical condition vanished without his medication while investigating a development project worth $47 million. We have plenty of probable cause. Summit Ridge Development occupied a renovated building on Main Street, formerly the site of Morrison's Hardware, a family business that had operated for 80 years before Ashford bought them out. The ground floor now housed an upscale coffee shop that served $7 lattes. The developer's offices were on the second floor. A young receptionist with perfect makeup and a practiced smile greeted Dalton. "Chief Dalton, Mr. Ashford is expecting you. Right this way." Victor Ashford's office was all glass and chrome, modern furniture that probably cost more than Dalton's annual salary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Main Street, giving Ashford a literal view of the town he was reshaping in his image. The man himself rose from behind a massive desk, extending a hand. "Robert, good to see you. It's been too long." Ashford was 50 years old, but looked younger, with professionally whitened teeth and the kind of tan that came from vacation homes in warm climates. His suit probably cost $3,000. Everything about him screamed success and careful image management. "Victor," Dalton said, shaking his hand briefly. "Thanks for seeing me on short notice." Of course. Anything for Millbrook's finest. Please sit. Can Melissa get you coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thanks." Ashford settled back into his leather chair, fingers steepled. "So what can I help you with?" "Permit the question," my assistant said. Dalton decided to cut through the pleasantries. "I'm investigating a missing person case. Thomas Thornton. Lives on Maple Street. He disappeared sometime between Sunday evening and Monday morning." Something flickered across Ashford's face, too quick to read clearly. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure how I can help. Mr. Thornton had been researching your Millbrook Meadows project. Made quite a few notes about environmental concerns." Ashford's smile didn't waver, but it took on a harder edge. "Yes, Mr. Thornton, he's been vocal about his opposition to the development. Sent several letters to the Planning Commission, submitted formal complaints, that sort of thing. Did you ever speak with him directly?" "Once, maybe 6 weeks ago. He came to this office, actually, with a folder full of geological surveys and water table maps. Wanted to convince me that the project was dangerous." Ashford spread his hands. I listened politely. Explained that we'd conducted thorough environmental studies, that everything was above board and fully permitted. He wasn't satisfied with that answer. "What happened then?" "He left. Said he'd see me at the county meeting. That was the last contact we had." Dalton watched Ashford carefully. The man was smooth, controlled, but there was tension in his shoulders. "When was this meeting scheduled?" "March 21st, next Thursday. The Planning Commission meets once a month to address public concerns before major projects break ground." Ashford leaned forward slightly. "Chief, I understand Thomas is missing, and I'm genuinely concerned about that. But if you're suggesting that his opposition to my project has anything to do with his disappearance, I have to say that's quite a leap." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm gathering information." "Well, let me give you some information. Millbrook Meadows represents 250 jobs during construction and permanent employment for at least 50 people once complete. It will bring families to this town, boost the tax base, revitalize the local economy. This community needs growth, not stagnation. And if that growth contaminates our water supply, Ashford's eyes hardened. It won't. We have environmental studies from certified professionals. Thomas Thornton, with all due respect to him, was not an expert. He was a retired veteran with too much time on his hands. Convinced he'd uncovered some conspiracy, he was a concerned citizen exercising his right to question a project that could affect his community. Of course, and we welcome that input. But at some point, Robert, you have to trust the professionals. You have to trust the system. Ashford stood, signaling the meeting was over. I hope you find Thomas safe and sound, truly, but I have nothing to do with his disappearance, and frankly, I resent the implication. Dalton rose slowly. I never implied anything, Victor. Interesting that your mind went there, though. As he turned to leave, Ashford's voice stopped him. Chief, one more thing. Thomas Thornton wasn't the only person opposing this project. There's a small group of residents, maybe a dozen people, who've been making noise. If something's happened to him, I'd suggest looking at his associates. Sometimes these activist types can be unstable. Dalton left without responding, but the comment settled uneasily in his gut. Was Ashford trying to misdirect the investigation, or was there truth to it? Back in his car, Dalton sat for a moment, processing the conversation. Ashford had been defensive, evasive even. But defensive didn't mean guilty. Plenty of successful people got touchy when questioned by police. His phone rang. Cromwell. Chief, I found David Henderson. He's a geology professor at the community college, retired. Lives 2 streets over from Thomas, and he's scared out of his mind. Says he needs to talk to you immediately. Won't say why over the phone. Give me his address. I'm on my way. As Dalton drove through Millbrook's quiet streets, a picture was forming, incomplete, frustrating, but definite. Thomas Thornton had uncovered something about the Millbrook Meadows project, something serious enough to document meticulously. He'd enlisted help from a geology professor. They'd been preparing to present their findings publicly, and now Thomas was missing. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. Dalton thought about James Thornton, sitting alone in his brother's house, hoping for answers. He thought about that Medal of Honor, the weight of it, what it represented, and he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever it took, whoever was responsible, he would bring Thomas Thornton home. David Henderson's house was a modest brick rambler with an overgrown garden and a tilted mailbox. The retired professor answered the door before Dalton could knock, his face pale and drawn. He was in his mid-60s, with wild grey hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. "Thank God you're here," Henderson said, practically pulling Dalton inside. "I didn't know who else to call." "After what happened to Thomas, slow down, Professor. What do you know about Thomas's disappearance?" Henderson led him to a dining room table covered in maps, soil samples in plastic bags, and printouts of technical reports. His hands shook as he shuffled through the papers. "We were supposed to present together at the county meeting. Thomas had the water contamination data. I had the geological analysis. Separately, they could dismiss us. Together, we had enough to halt the project indefinitely." Henderson's voice cracked. "Monday morning, I called to confirm our preparation meeting. No answer. I tried all day. Tuesday, I drove to his house. His truck was there, but no Thomas. That's when I knew something was wrong." "Why didn't you report it?" "Because I'm a coward." Henderson collapsed into a chair, shame written across his face. "I was afraid, still am. Do you understand what we uncovered, Chief? Summit Ridge didn't just fudge numbers on an environmental study. They fabricated entire sections. The groundwater contamination risk isn't minimal, it's guaranteed." Dalton sat across from him. "Show me." For the next 20 minutes, Henderson walked him through the evidence. The geological surveys showed limestone bedrock riddled with underground channels, a caste system that made the area incredibly vulnerable. Any construction would require extensive excavation. One wrong dig and contaminated runoff would flow directly into the aquifer feeding Millbrook's water supply. And plus 2 neighboring towns. Summit Ridge's study claimed solid bedrock at 40 feet, Henderson explained. Our surveys, actual surveys from the county, not paid consultants, show honeycomb limestone starting at 12 feet. They lied, Chief, deliberately and systematically. Could this be an honest mistake? Henderson's laugh was bitter. Geologists don't make 40-foot mistakes. Someone was paid to produce a clean study. Consequences be damned. Dalton's phone buzzed. A text from Cromwell. Got Thomas's phone records. Multiple calls too from Henderson. Also 3 calls to unknown numbers the day before disappearance. Tracing now, he showed Henderson the message. This unknown number, any idea who Thomas might have been calling? Henderson's face went even paler. Sunday night, Thomas called me. Said he'd been contacted by someone from inside Summit Ridge, a whistleblower. Someone who'd seen the real geological data and couldn't live with the lie anymore. Thomas was supposed to meet them Monday morning. Every nerve in Dalton's body went on alert. Where? He didn't say. Just that this person had documents, proof that Ashford knew about the falsified study. Thomas said if he could get those documents, we'd have everything we needed to stop the project and possibly press criminal charges. And you never heard from him again. Not a word. Dalton's mind raced. A whistleblower with damning evidence. A meeting that Thomas never came back from. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. His phone rang. Cromwell, her voice urgent. Chief, I traced that unknown number. It belongs to Rachel Pierce. She's Summit Ridge's environmental compliance officer. And get this, she called in sick Monday morning and hasn't been back to work since. Get me her address. Now, 10 minutes later, Dalton was parked outside an apartment complex on the edge of town. Backup units rolling in silently behind him. Rachel Pierce lived in Unit 2B. Her car, a silver Honda Civic, sat in the parking lot. Officer Patterson joined him at the base of the stairs. How do you want to play this, Chief? Carefully. If she's the whistleblower, she's terrified. If she's involved in Thomas's disappearance, she's dangerous. Either way, we go in prepared. They climbed the stairs, Dalton's hand resting on his service weapon. He knocked firmly. Ms. Pierce? This is Chief Dalton with the Millbrook Police Department. I need to speak with you. Silence. Then a woman's voice trembling. Go away. I can't help you. Miss Pierce, I'm investigating the disappearance of Thomas Thornton. I believe you spoke with him Sunday night. A longer pause. Then the sound of locks turning. The door opened a crack, revealing a woman in her early 30s with red-rimmed eyes and dark circles of exhaustion. She'd been crying. Is he alive? She whispered. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out. Rachel's face crumpled. Oh God, this is my fault. Miss Pierce, I need you to tell me everything. Right now. She let them inside. The apartment was neat, but showed signs of someone in crisis. Empty coffee mugs everywhere, blankets on the couch indicating she'd been sleeping there instead of the bedroom. A suitcase sat by the door, half-packed. I was going to run, she said, her voice hollow. Just disappear. Start over somewhere else. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Thornton. What if he's hurt because of me? Dalton kept his voice level, non-threatening. Tell me about Sunday night. The story came out in a rush. Rachel had worked for Summit Ridge for 2 years, hired specifically for her environmental expertise. 6 months ago, she'd been handed the geological study for Millbrook Meadows and immediately spotted problems. When she raised concerns, Ashford had been dismissive. When she persisted, he threatened her job. I should have quit right then, she said, wiping her eyes. But I have student loans, medical bills for my mother. I needed the income. So I kept quiet and hated myself for it. What changed? 2 weeks ago, I overheard Ashford on the phone. He was talking about managing the opposition, about neutralizing problems before they became bigger problems. He mentioned Thomas Thornton by name. Rachel's hands twisted together. That's when I realized how far he'd go to protect this project. I copied files, saved emails, gathered everything I could. Then I called Mr. Thornton and asked to meet. Where did you meet him? I didn't. I got scared. Monday morning, I was supposed to give him the documents at the old grain elevator outside town, 6 a.m., before anyone would see us. But Sunday night, Ashford called me at home. He said he knew what I was planning. Said if I valued my career, my freedom, my life, I'd forget about Thomas Thornton and keep my mouth shut. Her voice broke. So I didn't go. I didn't meet him. I abandoned him. Dalton felt ice forming in his veins. Did Thomas know about the location change? I sent him a text Sunday night saying I couldn't make it. But I don't know if he saw it. What if he went to the grain elevator anyway? What if someone was waiting for him? Dalton was already moving toward the door, radio in hand. Patterson, get every available unit to the old Miller grain elevator on Highway 52. Cromwell, I need search and rescue. Medical on standby. Move. The grain elevator sat on abandoned property, a relic from when Millbrook had been primarily agricultural. As Dalton's car skidded into the gravel lot, the last rays of sunlight painted the rusted structure in shades of orange and red. And there, behind the main building, partially hidden by overgrown weeds, was Thomas Thornton's truck. Dalton's heart hammered as he approached the vehicle, weapon drawn. The truck was empty, but the driver's door was ajar. On the ground nearby, Thomas's wallet, a cracked cell phone, and signs of a struggle. Disturbed gravel, drag marks leading toward the old storage building. Thomas Thornton, Dalton shouted. This is the police. If you can hear me, make a sound. Silence. Then faint, so faint he almost missed it, a sound from inside the storage building. A weak groan, Patterson kicked in the door. The interior was dark, dusty, filled with old equipment. And there, in the corner, barely conscious and badly dehydrated, was Thomas Thornton. He'd been locked inside for 4 days. The ambulance arrived within minutes. As paramedics worked on Thomas, Dalton knelt beside him. Mr. Thornton, can you hear me? Can you tell me who did this? Thomas's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. His lips were cracked, his voice barely a whisper. Ashford. He was here. He said I should have minded my business. That was all Dalton needed to hear. 3 hours later, Victor Ashford was arrested at his home, charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. The documents Rachel Pierce provided showed not just falsified environmental studies, but email exchanges proving Ashford had knowingly endangered public safety for profit. At Millbrook General Hospital, James Thornton sat beside his brother's bed, holding his hand. Thomas was severely dehydrated and had a concussion, but doctors said he'd make a full recovery. Dalton stood in the doorway, watching the two brothers, reunited after so many lost years, nearly separated forever by greed and violence. James looked up, tears streaming down his weathered face. Thank you, Chief. Thank you for not giving up on him. Dalton thought about that morning, about slapping handcuffs on a desperate man who was only trying to save his brother, about the Medal of Honor and what it truly represented. Not just one act of heroism, but a lifetime of standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. I should be thanking you, Mr. Thornton. Both of you. You reminded me what it means to serve. As Dalton left the hospital, his phone buzzed with a message from the county prosecutor. Millbrook Meadows project officially halted pending criminal investigation. Environmental review ordered for all Summit Ridge developments statewide. One man's courage had saved not just his town's water supply, but potentially thousands of lives, and it had all started with a desperate plea in a diner that Dalton had almost ignored. He thought about the choices he'd made that day, the assumptions, the rush to judgment. He thought about second chances, and how sometimes the people who seem the most broken are actually the strongest among us. In his office that night, Dalton pulled up the arrest photo of James Thornton from that morning, a lifetime ago, it seemed now. He deleted it from the system. That wasn't who James Thornton was. That wasn't the story that needed to be remembered. The real story was about two brothers who'd found their way back to each other. About veterans who'd fought for their country and never stopped fighting for what was right. About a small town that had almost lost everything, and the people who'd saved it. That was the story worth telling. And as Dalton turned off his office light and headed home, he made himself a promise. He would never again mistake desperation for disturbance or judge someone before understanding their story, because sometimes the people we arrest are exactly the heroes we need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.